Why do you think these struggles and imposter syndrome more specifically is so common in engineering or technical workplaces?
When there's a lot of the ego going around, a lot of people can be going, oh, well, I need to be up on the same level as that guy, or those people over there, they done that. And I'm only working in this small company and they're working in one of the big multinationals. So there's a lot of that. But again, with the people with the egos, a lot of them are probably
Feeling the same
peacocking
way,
themselves,
yeah, exactly.
and they're changing jobs and they're doing different stuff. So it's this kind of self-repeating cycle, really, that, it's just...
Did you know that up to 80% of professionals experience imposter syndrome, but most never talk about it? That's especially true in technical fields like engineering. In this episode, I'm lucky to be joined by Jason McDaid, who is a senior fire engineer and imposter syndrome coach. We're going to be exploring why this silent struggle is so widespread in our industry and what leaders can do about it. We're also going to talk about how imposter syndrome shows up differently across different roles and why it's not just a personal issue, but also an organizational one, as well as practical ways leaders can build trust and confidence in their teams. If you ever felt like you're faking it or you're leading someone who might, this is a conversation you're not going to want to miss. But before we jump in, I wanted to tell you about our AEC PM Connect event. This is where emerging and experienced leaders can learn about real-world strategies, drive performance, empower teams, and lead with purpose. Visit aecpmconnect.com to register today. We currently have events in Kansas City and New Jersey with more coming. I'm your host, Rebecca Swaby, and this is the AEC Leadership Podcast, previously the Engineering Career Coach Podcast. Let's jump right in. Jason, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Can you share a bit about your background and the path that led you to your current role as senior fire engineer and also somebody who supports others with imposter syndrome or internal pressures?
Yeah, I took a bit of a scenic route to getting into the engineering field. I was a chef for 8 years and working in fine dining restaurants, and I decided I wanted to go for a career with less stress and better hours, and somehow I get into fire engineering. So I've often said, where was the career guidance teacher or person who told me that move? So yeah, I went back to college at 33. So I graduated as an engineer at 36. And this was just right in the middle of the global financial crisis. And I got offered a job in New Zealand. So myself and my wife and our 4 kids packed up everything and we headed off down to New Zealand to start our new life and my new career. So yeah, it all started very well, and I was passionate about it and determined to make this work now as my new career. So shortly after getting into the engineering, I really loved it. I always loved fire. I'm one of these people that's fascinated by fire. So I loved that I was working in this field, but I started noticing things that I couldn't remember, things like figures and table numbers. So it'd be travel distances or fire load factors, different things that we used every day, but I couldn't remember them. And I started questioning myself. I always had a bad memory, but it started becoming more apparent now. It wasn't so important being a chef, but as an engineer dealing with figures all the time, it really started becoming noticeable to me. And I started doubting myself. I started thinking, am I stupid? Why can't I remember these other engineers were rhyming these figures off like they were reading them in a book or picking them off shelves. And I just struggled. And I eventually started questioning, should I be in this career? How did I even get an engineering degree? Like, what am I doing here? So that's where it all started to kind of sink in at the start. Then we moved back to Ireland, and I had a bit of a toxic boss in my first company, and coming back to working with a new set of codes and a whole new set of struggles, really, and stresses. So that's where I first had a bit of a wall, or my first wall potentially, and started slid into depression, anxiety, burnout eventually, and even suicidal ideation, at one point, just thinking this can't go on. I can't go on like this, and I'm better off to my family if I'm not here, because if I, if I lose my job, how will my daughters get married? They can't afford a wedding. We'll be on the street. We'll have to move house. So, yeah, it became really, really intense. So around this time, after a number of job hoppings, when I got back to Ireland, the imposter syndrome was really uh, ramping up with me, or these feelings of just I'm the worst engineer in New Zealand and now I'm the worst engineer in Ireland. I can't do this, but I've no other options. This was my final chance as a mature student. So one day I came home to my wife and just told her I can't do this anymore. I can't go on. And thankfully, she made me ring the GP online, and I told him, and he prescribed me antidepressants. And the next morning, I started taking them. And that was kind of the turning moment, I suppose. It was when I had asked for help. It was when I had opened up to my wife, who for the first time, and married 20 odd years at that stage, that I confided in her that I wasn't doing well. So that was where my recovery journey started. Through this journey, I discovered life coaching. And once I found the life coaching, it just clicked in my head. I was going, this is something that I want to do. This is what I've been longing for all my life, was this. I never knew what life coaching was, but once I Googled it and I saw somebody's profile on LinkedIn, and a bell went off my, yep, this is it. So I've got into life coaching, being coached, studied to be a life coach and trained to be one. And through this, I just found out about imposter syndrome. So that was a big moment, a light bulb moment, going, this is what I've been experiencing here. There's all these feelings that I'm the only one here who can't do this job. Everybody else can do it, and I can't. So I got straight into head first into the imposter syndrome too. I started researching it. I'd done training in the field, and it was brilliant, and it answered so many questions. But the puzzle wasn't complete with me. And so I just kept going at it. But 2 weeks before my 50th birthday, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And that was the total light bulb moment. That just went, that answers the bad memory, there's bad recall, so many different things. And it's where the imposter syndrome for me particularly grew and thrived in it. So I knew the imposter syndrome wasn't everything. So as I say, I kept on reading into it and looking for a better explanation. And that's where I came up with the term hidden cognitive strain. It was something deeper than imposter syndrome, or it was more. Imposter syndrome was a huge part, but it was the strain of trying to function and trying to maintain this facade of functioning and successful and happy, while internally just clinging on by my fingertips. It was, I just thought if I let go of my world, even for a second, it just would have turned to dust, and that would have been it. So yeah,
Wow.
that's what I talk about now, and that's
Wow.
kind of what I help people with.
Well, thank you for sharing such a personal story. And I think our audience, there's going to be a lot of parts of that that people will relate to. You know, toxic work environments, unsure of why they're struggling in a particular way, struggling with depression. It's a journey that I think to some extent a lot of us can relate to. So I really appreciate the way that you sort of laid that all out.
Uh,
Yeah, I was curious, how long were you struggling and thinking about these things just internally in your own head before you reached out? You said you talked to your wife, right? Like how long was this going on before you opened up?
Probably a couple of years. I think when I came back to Ireland, it was about 2018, August 2018. And the toxic boss, it it crushed me, and I just thought, I'll never get this. I'll never get these codes. I'll never be able to understand this. Even though I was really successful in New Zealand, was fire engineering team leader, and I strode out of New Zealand. I could have taken on the world, and within just a couple of months back in Ireland, I'd say within a month, this boss had just broken me down, and that just went on. It's snowballed then over the next, I would say, 4 years probably, to the point of the suicidal ideation where I was standing at a roundabout. Don't know if you have roundabouts there,
We do.
a
Yeah.
junction in the road, and there was a double-decker bus coming along, and I just I thought to myself, the thought went through my head that if this bus driver just misses or mistakes this corner slightly, he would just hit me, and that'd be it all over, and I'd have no more pain, no more stress. And then my kids, my daughters could get married because I've got an insurance policy. And, all that went through my head in this few split seconds. And the scary part was that I didn't step out of the way. I was on the footpath, but I didn't kind of lean out of the way to hope he didn't hit me. I
Mhm.
just stood, and the bus came along and passed, and the driver happily went off on his way.
Mhm.
But to me, that was probably the low point where I was going, right, this isn't right,
Yeah.
I can't go on like this.
Yeah.
It took another while then before I opened up to my wife. That I think that was just I got a call at 25 past five. We were finished work at half five, and maybe I got an email from a client at, I think it was about 27 minutes past five. Jason, could you jump on a meeting here? We wanted to discuss this XYZ project. And it just hit me as going, these people, it's my home time. Like, why is this happening? I can't handle this. I have to, my own time is, it's for me.
Yeah.
I don't know really exactly what it was, but it's kind of broke me.
Yeah.
Whatever it was about that one little thing about this guy looking for a meeting so close to finishing time. And I was just like, this industry, I hate it, and I hate everybody in it, yeah.
Yeah.
And I just went home and I said to my wife, I just can't do this anymore. I can't do it.
The
And
pressure was
yes,
building. It sounded like you basically touched the bottom or very, very close to, and it cracked things wide
yeah.
open. That was an inflection point.
Yeah, that's it. It
Yeah.
wasn't the biggest thing that ever happened to me. It was the smallest thing. And I often joke that in New Zealand, I was involved in projects designing huge shopping malls, football stadiums or sports stadiums and high-rise buildings. But the building that actually cracked me was a two-story residential house. This little tiny little house in Galway, in the
Yeah.
west of Ireland. That was the building that cracked me. So
Oh, that's funny. But we know it's a culmination of everything that had come before, it sounds like too. So, yeah. So just, you know, you used the term, was it hidden cognition strain?
hidden cognitive strain.
Cognitive strain.
Yeah.
Okay. And I want to dive more into that. And I want to dive more into imposter syndrome. If you could, in your own words, just elaborate on that and describe how would you describe imposter syndrome and how does it tend to show up in engineers in particular or people in a leadership role?
Yeah. So imposter syndrome to me was the constant fear that at some point somebody's going to tap me on the shoulder and say, "We know you shouldn't be here." And it wasn't just a passing doubt, it's the ongoing belief that your success is a fluke, that you don't deserve where you are, to be where you are. Your achievements are, you can't find a reason for them. Basically, that you're a fraud and that you've somehow fooled everyone, and it's only a matter of time before you're exposed. So that it's the fear. Imposter syndrome is a fear based thought pattern, really, and it's the fear of being exposed for being this fraud. And when you live in that fear, it's exhausting and it's terrifying as well. Because, like I said, with my daughter's wedding, it's going. Who could pay for this if I get sacked? So you're constantly living with that. So even when you've got evidence to the contrary, you still believe that you're a fraud. You make good feedback in work, promotions, working in big buildings. I got an engineering degree. None of it registers you can't internalize these accomplishments because you don't believe that the reason you got them was because you are competent, and imposter syndrome is really about competence, your internal view of competence and your own competence. So, you know, you are just waiting, you're waiting for somebody to notice that you don't deserve it, and they're going to expose you, and it's only a matter of time before that happens. So yeah, it's exhausting and terrifying waiting for that.
Yeah.
It shows up in engineering. Sorry, I think you would ask, how does it show up in engineering?
I did, but
Yeah,
before we jump
yeah,
to that, I want to talk about fear a little bit more because, some fears come internal, some are external due to the environments that we're in, the work that we have to do, whatever it is. How do you see fear actually impacting the day-to-day work, productivity, efficiency, for example? Is it something that people can work effectively with it or
yeah. Like fear doesn't really allow much to happen that
yeah.
that's not totally coated in it. So every action when you're living in fear is going to be really governed by it. So there are coping strategies that we employ. They're kind of protective strategies. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the time, we don't know that we are using these protective strategies. They're just stuff that we have kind of assimilated into our daily behavior, like procrastination,
Mm-hmm.
overworking, self sabotage, keeping a low profile, not sticking your hand up to answer or
Right,
volunteer for anything,
right.
keeping quiet
Yeah.
in meetings. With procrastination, it's maybe not starting a report or not finishing a report, because when you finish something, then you can be judged, and you really have to. I always hated the report review part because I always felt it. Another light-hearted way I use is like a hedgehog lying on its back with its little soft underbelly exposed for the eagles and the hawks to just rip it apart. So that's how I felt when I was handing up a report to be reviewed, that you're letting your competence be judged, and it's this judgment of competence that you're in fear of, because if they discover you're incompetent, then it all falls apart. So another one of my coping mechanisms was leaving jobs. So I always thought, right, you get 6 months maybe at the start of a new job before they probably realize how bad you are and what a bad decision they've made to hire you. And so I always had what I would call a parachute. And a parachute was another job that I'd kind of keep in my back pocket. And when I felt that the net was closing in on me, that the bosses were kind of finding out, or people were realizing how bad I was, that's when I'd start getting the parachute ready. And then when I thought,
Uh-huh.
right, I need to get out of here now, I'd jump out of the burning plane that was my career, and I'd just be gone. And I'd be like, oh, you should have caught me when you had me. That was your chance to expose me. So now I'm
Yeah.
now I'm unleashed in some other poor company. And then you land into the new job, and this was what I called peacocking. So the strategy was parachuting and peacocking. So the peacocking was when I landed into the new job, and I'd have my chest high or puffed out, and my tail feathers were up,
You
and
got the job starting
yeah, and
fresh.
it's all, I'm great, and I'll solve your problems. And yeah, so that was my one. So the peacocking would only last so long, and then you'd be back into the parachuting, and it's a very destructive pattern, because when you parachute, you're at a low point, and when you get into the new job, you rise up a little, but you never rise up back to where you were. And after a few times, you're parachuting, but you don't have anything left in you to go back up. So you have a very short time
Yeah.
before the peacock and feathers are gone, and so yeah, it wears you down as well. So
I was gonna say it sounds exhausting.
it is. It's
It is
yeah,
exhausting.
exhausting
Yeah.
is just.
And there's the work, then there's all this work around the work
Mm.
that we're doing to protect
And
ourselves.
that's the hidden cognitive strain part. It's the trying to function and trying to make it look good and that everything's okay, but inside it's just turmoil and clinging on with your fingertips. And the further you go down, the more times you parachute, the the less of a grip you do have on it. And
Absolutely. You mentioned some behaviors such as procrastinating, avoiding, not speaking up. Now, sometimes somebody who's in a management position might see these behaviors and think, oh, this person doesn't care, or they're not a good employee. They don't care about the company. They don't care about the work. That's the temptation,
yeah,
right? But in my observation, most people actually do want to do a great job at work. Most people genuinely want to do good work and be appreciated. Like that's such a big part of our lives, right? So, ho- what do you think that leaders and managers need to know when they're recognized, when they're seeing some of this behavior in their employees?
yeah. So it's it's difficult because some people, if you take the likes of procrastination or keeping a low profile, those people might not be performing very high, or kind of standing out for their good performance. And they're maybe more visible to see, but then you have the overworkers and the overpreparers who look like they're the star staff member,
Right.
so they're going on a completely different road than the people who are procrastinating or staying quiet. So it's kind of often they're the people who are doing all the work, and there's this guy, he ask him to do the meeting minutes and he'll just do them brilliant, or he'll have that project in 4 days early. For those people, they're living in fear of their incompetence and their weaknesses being exposed, so they overwork and over prepare, and that leads to burnout as well and stress, because they just, if they get a bit of praise, oh, that was brilliant, you done that well last week, then they're going, oh man, now I have to do that well every time. I've set an expectation for myself. So they're on one side, and then the the quieter ones, that are kind of drifting along, they can get overlooked, for different ways. So for leaders, it's just don't take it's about learning to recognize the coping strategies, really. So if you can learn about the coping strategies that people may be employing, and when you're learning about it, you'll also learn about your own coping strategies. And when you can start to identify these in other people, then you can go, oh, they're not just quiet, or maybe they're not just quiet, maybe they are struggling with confidence about their own competence, or maybe this guy who's brilliant, maybe he's so living in fear as well, that maybe I need to talk to him and say, great work, but how are you actually doing? Are you doing okay? And just to be there for the staff, and be approachable as a boss or as a leader, and just be
Yeah, that
aware of the little subtle signs that could be, your staff could be living like this.
yeah, absolutely. And I want to dig a little deeper on that. A manager who might see hundreds of staff members over the years across different groups and different types of projects, they might start to recognize different patterns. So, for example, you mentioned that I think that you said you were diagnosed with ADHD later in your life, in your 50s, right? So, if a manager is starting to recognize some of those things, say in a younger staff member or staff member at any age, this is a bit of a delicate topic. How do you bring up what you're seeing? How do you balance the management part of it and bringing up the things that you're seeing, and maybe how that relates to other kinds of similar behaviors you've seen in other employees versus the individual identifying, managing, and growing in a way that is on their own time and on their own journey?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, really, because you don't want to just walk up to someone and go, "Oh, do you have ADHD?" I noticed
Right,
a couple of things, because when you do get diagnosed, you start to see these traits in other people. I've started playing pickleball lately just for a bit of exercise, and somebody said something to me last week at it, and I was going, "Oh, I bet she has ADHD," and I was trying to ask her and talk to her about it, but it's going, "No,
right.
you can't just say that, because maybe they're not diagnosed, maybe they don't know yet, So it is a very tricky one to, how do you deal with these things? So I suppose awareness of the various tools that can be used, within a work environment, having a mental health policy within your business, having a mental health first aider within you know, each office or depending what kind of business it is, and making it become so that discussing things like this is not taboo, or that if anybody were to be identified as having ADHD or autism or dyslexia, that they're not feeling like, oh, stick them in a corner over there or something, that it's something that, you know, to me, I never thought I had ADHD, not in my wildest dreams. I thought it was young boys who ran around a lot, and that just was never me. My hyperactivity was in my brain. So yeah, it's like there's a lot of misunderstanding of things like autism and ADHD. So I think for leaders, it's really about educating yourself first, and trying to understand the variety of things that could be going on with any of your staff. There could be a multitude. It could be ADHD. It could be marriage problems. It could be imposter syndrome. They all can contribute to hidden cognitive strain because they're
Mhm.
that invisible mental load that people are carrying, but it's invisible, so they're not, it's
Yeah.
very hard to see. And for a
Yeah.
leader, it's just really, yeah, about maybe upskilling yourself on things like the coping mechanisms. And Dr. Valerie Young, who's one of the foremost authorities on imposter syndrome, she has 5 competence types that she has developed: the perfectionist, the expert. Learning about these, and it will help you to spot these little cues in your staff, and to
Mhm.
maybe go, yeah, maybe this guy or this lady might be putting on a facade, putting on a mask that maybe is covering something an awful lot deeper. And, maybe a quiet, kind word could be all it takes to start a conversation.
Mhm. Absolutely. This is so important, especially in the AEC industry, engineering firms, where staffing challenges can be a big challenge in general. There's a shortage of certain types of qualified staff. And it sounds like, based on what you're saying, you know, people that are suffering in these ways, the work should be like this, but it's like this. And it's contributing to burnout. It's contributing to turnover. It's just contributing to, in addition to the mental strain on the human, it's contributing to inefficiencies in the
Yeah.
workplace. So this is something that matters so much.
Oh, it's definitely like the turnover is a big one, because for somebody like me who job hopped, so I might stay 18 months and I was gone in 18 months and 18 months. And I was talking to the owner of a fire engineering consultancy in Ireland a couple of weeks ago, and he told me one of his senior staff had left, and he says it costs him between 60 and 80,000 euros if a senior staff member leaves the position, because there's such a shortage of staff. There's a shortage of trained senior experienced staff, and it just disrupts the whole business. Yeah, he said 60 to 80,000 euros for a single staff member leaving. So for me,
That's
I
incredible.
was doing this to every company that I went to, and I was basically using them to get me out of one job, and then I'd construct some kind of story that I had to leave. Oh, I can't stay here. I have to go because, their morals
Mm-hmm.
aren't up to mine, or this guy was bad,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd be gone. But, I'm not saying my toxic bosses weren't to the blame, but at the same time, it was impacting the company because I left a huge hole where,
Mm-hmm.
because I was still functioning and I was able to turn out the reports and do the jobs. And a lot of that was my peacocking. I'd be on the phone to fire officers and clients and going, yeah, and trying to distract from the mess that was behind me. So I was functioning well, but inside I was crumbling. So yeah, and a lot of the
Yeah.
time your work suffers your quality as well. If you think, oh, I can't hand this up, and you're slow, and yeah.
Why do you think these struggles and imposter syndrome, more specifically, is so common in engineering or technical workplaces?
a lot of it can be down to the culture of engineering work. There's an awful lot of egos in engineering, and people are there with the chests out and they're, I've worked in this big building and this project, and there's a lot of that. And when there's a lot of the ego going around, a lot of people can be going, oh, well, I need to be up on the same level as that guy, or those people over there, they done that. And I'm only working in this small company and they're working in one of the big multinationals. So there's a lot of that. But again, with the people with the egos, there a lot of them are probably peacocking
Feeling the
themselves,
same way. Yeah,
and
exactly.
and they're and they're changing jobs and they're doing different stuff. So it's this kind of self-repeating cycle, really, that, it's just we're all propagating it throughout the thing. So, as well as that, with engineers, like I said about the report reviews and say architecture as well, be one of them where their design is going to be critiqued by, a client, by their senior architects, by, the public. So it's a very bearing your soul kind of thing as well, like the hedgehog on his back with his belly open. You're there saying, this is my competence in this design field, please tear it apart, and that's the way that reviews can happen as well, particularly in architecture. It's from talking to architects, and I deal with them a lot, there's a lot of negativity kind of comes down from the top, and it's people kind of maybe making themselves feel better by tearing apart the younger guys' stuff, and that's not good enough and that doesn't meet the standards. So, and that comes from even college. I found about architecture that I listened on a podcast once, and the guy says, right, don't bother getting on a sports team, don't bother getting on a debate team. This is your life now, and you will just be doing architecture for the next 4 or 5 years, and it's going to be hell. And it just seemed like such a negative way to start people's careers, and then they come into the career and it just carries on like that. And the same then in the other engineering disciplines. For fire engineering, I know we have to do reports constantly. We're doing fire
Mhm.
compliance reports, and again, you're putting them up to a council or a local authority, and somebody's going
Right.
across it with a red pen. And just this morning or yesterday afternoon, I got a 22 point RFI back, and I'm going, oh, how dare he, say that about me? And then I have to kind of bring, right, that's his job, that's his part of it, and I'll just
Yeah.
answer his questions. But it's this attacking and this defense mode as well. So, yeah, it's,
What's really interesting and what I'm picking up on is the fact that at the end of the day, it sounds like a lot of these struggles, a lot of these behaviors that are showing up is because people really, really care about the work that they're doing. They really, really do care about doing a great job and producing high quality work. It's unfortunate that some of the behaviors that show up at the beginning are sort of counter suggestive to that, right?
yeah, that's it. Like myself, I got into fire engineering and I was passionate, and I
Right,
wanted to work in fire, and I was going, this is actually saving lives, by doing this
right.
job, by getting out of bed in the morning, I'm saving lives if I can do this right. But by the end of
Mm-hmm.
it, by the time that I hit rock bottom, I hated my career. I hated my job. I hated other fire engineers. I hated everybody on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn who was talking about fire engineering, because they were all happy at it and they were doing things. And oh, we released a new report. And then going, why are you doing that? Like, what's the point? It's all rubbish. And I'd totally gone to the total polar opposite of it.
Yeah,
And that was sad for me as well, because I was so passionate about it at the start.
right.
But through my work then with the coaching and imposter syndrome, the ADHD diagnosis, and my hidden cognitive strain work, I've found that I didn't really hate it. I just hated what was going on inside me, because I didn't know what it was. I
Yes.
didn't know why I was struggling, but I was, and I was just clinging on, with my fingertips, and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
understand it. So by understanding why I was feeling that way, I opened myself up to being able to go, oh, do you know what? I don't actually hate my job. I don't hate my career. I don't hate every other fire engineer, and fair play to them for doing these
What a
reports.
realization, eh? What
Yeah,
Yeah, yes. So that's a good segue into strategies. I think there's going to be a lot of people who relate to what we're talking about. I'd love to hear from you about some simple, practical ways engineers or project leaders can start to actually manage these patterns in themselves.
yeah, it's like the first step really, you said the word perfectly. There was patterns, and that's what it
Hmm.
is. It's these patterns of safety mechanisms, they slide their way in, or they creep in and they grow, and before you know it, you're a procrastinator, flying under the radar, job hopping, overworker or something, and you didn't you didn't see any of these coming up, so it's very hard to know that you're actually doing them. And a lot of people just think this is how I work. I just work really hard. I just put 10 hours into something, that other guys probably wouldn't do. Oh, he would only spend half the time in that, but I'll do even twice that, and I'll make it brilliant and perfect. And that's just who you are. And the other people, like procrastinators, procrastination isn't laziness, which it might come across as. It's fear. It's fear of getting it wrong or not being able to do it perfectly. So you put it off, and I'll slide that over there. And one of my things was I used to do other stuff that I hadn't been asked to do, like designing filing systems or writing standard operating procedures for the whole company. And I was giving them up to my boss. It's going like, are you actually doing any of the reports that and I was going, oh, but I've got this going, right, just stop doing stuff now and please just concentrate on your work. It's what I call the illusion kind of. I was like a master of illusion. I'd be distracting you with my left hand so you didn't see what was going on the right. But it was just this fear of finishing something, and again being judged on it, but your competence being judged. And the same with, over preparing, holding back in meetings, switching jobs. They're all just about fear, and their survival tactics. And once you see that, you can work with it and not against it, because when you don't know that it's a pattern, it's just, that's me, that's how I work, I'm Jason, I'm do stuff I'm not told, or whatever it would be. But when you see that it's a pattern, then you can go, all right, I can do something about this, and it's kind of about, what do I do? What are my patterns, and what are they protecting me from? What is my big fear? What am I so scared of? To me, it was being sent home in disgrace and sacked and being unable to get another job, and the financial ruin that this would have caused, the weddings and blah, blah, blah.
Hmm.
To other people, it could be a different fear. So it's about acknowledging it and naming it, really, and kind of, it's there's more to it that I go into in my coaching and my workshops. It's kind of, we go into deeper things, we name them, then you just try to work out, what's this costing me? What is the cost to me of this pattern? You know, Staying or keeping your head down in meetings or procrastinating could be costing you promotion opportunities. Uh, Working hard, overworking, over preparing could be costing you social and family things, because you're in work and you should be at home with your girlfriend, boyfriend, kids,
Hmm.
whatever it may be. So there's sacrifices to all of these patterns, and you have to kind of question, what is the cost to me in this? And when you can weigh that up, then you go, oh, um, I've answered what my fear is. I've seen what it's costing me, and then you can kind of try and work out, what's the reality of it? Am I really terrible at work? Am I the worst fire engineer in New Zealand and Ireland at the same time? Could that possibly be
Yeah.
true? Could I be that bad? And when you objectively look at this, and you kind of, no, that's not real. It's one of the
Mm.
questions is that true 100% of the time? And you go, no, it's not. I'm actually quite an
Right.
accomplished fire engineer. And, so that's one little thing. Another thing is naming something out loud, just saying the sentence out loud to yourself I'm delaying this task because I'm scared I'll mess it up, or I'm over preparing on this report because I don't want them to see, what I could do just in a normal amount of time. It's just saying this and it's naming it, naming your inner critic. And when you do that, it turns into something that you can respond to then, rather than this one-sided voice in your head going, "You're crap, you're terrible." When you can go look back
Yeah.
at it and go, "No, actually, I'm not." And it sounds so much simpler. It almost sounds too simple, but it is that simple, really, and it's a lot of simple steps. For me, it was the realization. It was kind of it was like a light bulb going off. It wasn't this thing that I was in therapy for 4 years, and I made small incremental kind of changes or steps forward. With imposter syndrome and the ADHD diagnosis, it was like boom, the lights came on,
Wow.
so it was just about reframing the way that your brain done this. And the last one, which was really big for me as well, was normalizing the experience, finding out that other people were feeling the same. But for me, the isolation, feeling like I was the only one in New Zealand who couldn't get this, and the only one in Ireland who could get it, that I was just so bad and everybody else could do it. I felt like I was in an island in the middle of the Pacific, just isolated on my own. But then when I found out about imposter syndrome and realized, oh, there's so many people experience this, and that's why I set up the 78% club. 78% was the first statistic I heard of how many people experience imposter beliefs throughout their career, and I was going, wow, Jesus, here's me.
That's a high
Yeah,
number.
like I thought I was on my own, and then to find out that 8 out of 10 people are experiencing this, and so knowing that it's common takes the shame out of it, and that's what the 78%
Right.
club is about. It's kind of like, come and join the club. We're all in here. Let's, you know,
Right. There's more of us
yeah,
in than
that's it.
out.
And safety in numbers or whatever it may be, but just this normalization of it that, I'm not the only one here. I'm not the only one doubting it. And surely 78% of us can't be wrong, because if 78% of engineers were incompetent, then buildings would be falling down, there'd be hotels falling down, they'd be burning down, nothing would work. The world wouldn't work if 78% of people were actually as incompetent as they believed themselves to be. So, yeah,
That's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah. And I have two questions to follow up on that. So the thing about a pattern is sometimes it takes time to recognize that there is a pattern, right? And when you're facing these things in silence in your own head in an environment where people are not talking about it, it feels like there's a lot of shame. I imagine it can take a long time to sort of figure this out. So I'm curious, first of all, what is the age range of the clients that you tend to see that come to you looking for support?
there'd be varying ages. I suppose I
Mm.
mostly focus on professionals in the construction industry, or engineering, architecture,
Yeah.
construction, so
Yeah.
there are people like myself who got their degree, got into the job, ready to go, and then life started, bringing them down a little. So it maybe takes up to, your early 30s before
Mm.
you kind of start going, oh, I don't know if this is right, and then
Yeah.
as that's probably when people, they're getting married and they're having kids, and, who knows, health problems, breakups, this, that, and the other. So imposter syndrome to me just had that little feeling that it didn't encompass everything. And that's where the hidden cognitive strain came from, because it took in more of the person's life. If you're having
Mm.
family problems and then you still have to go into work and you're dealing with this, or if your kids are
Mm.
annoying you or whatever it may
Yeah, there's
be.
layers to
Yeah,
it.
there's so
Yeah.
many layers. So I suppose the more life goes on, the more cognitive strain you are hiding. So yeah, like it could be anybody though, from any age. And
Yeah.
I'm even doing work I haven't started yet, but I do some work with university students. I do talks in the local university here, and it's helping students who are coming up to their final year before they go off out into the industry and kind of go, yeah, let's get a job and help the world, and then get knocked down. It's kind of letting them know that, these kind of things can happen, and burnout and stress and imposter syndrome may very well play a large part in the next few years of your life. But if we can let them know what these things are at 18 or 19 or 24 or 28, like me as a mature student,
Yeah.
then they're better prepared going in, and they may be able to go, do you know what? No, I'm noticing something here. Is this a pattern that, I remember
Right.
that guy back in final year of college talking about it, and maybe this is something that I need to just pay a little attention to. So, yeah, like that's something that I'm doing talks with, and I'm hoping to launch a bit more. I've approached them with a bit of a student welcome pack, just to kind of
Oh,
let them
great.
know these kind of things. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. So I suppose to answer your question, they could be any age, really. It's about
Yeah.
from teenagers
Yeah,
on.
and just to build on that, so sort of laying out the situation where the first situation where you don't have information, you're all on your own. The opposite to that is exactly what you said, where we're talking about this openly, honestly. And so I'd like to know, like, what can leaders do to make an environment feel more safe, allowing people to speak more open and honestly, even just breathe a little bit easier at work, to support people that at any age, at any stage in their career.
Yeah, like I think the leaders are probably the people who really need to take this on board, because it's like culture has to start from the top. It can't start from the bottom, it has to go from the top to the bottom, permeate down. Yet they have to lead by example. And I suppose one of the easiest things, or maybe not easy, but for leaders is to drop the performance. It's just a lot of people in leadership feel like they have to be bulletproof, they have to be calm, confident, in control. But this just creates more pressure down the line, because if
Hmm.
the boss never shows doubt, then nobody else ever feels safe there admitting they're
Hmm.
struggling. Oh, the boss, he's relentless. He's up there till 10 o'clock every night, and he never says anything's hard. So that it leads to a silent culture of everybody pretending that they're okay and that they're coping, and we're just going on. So
Hmm.
the most powerful thing a leader really can do is to model realness, and it doesn't mean oversharing, turning meetings into therapy, but we don't need that. It just means saying things like, I find this a bit tricky, or I needed help with that as well, or anybody else understand that? Can you explain it to me? Just to small admissions that show you're human, and
Yes.
that you can be approached, that you're not, that we don't all have to be these perfect, unquestioning, never failing, never faltering beings. So yeah, and it also helps to name things like, like we're a team that values questions, not quick answers. If you want to have a kind of slogans kind of thing, or it's okay not to know everything straight away. I worked in a company where I used to mentor a lot of engineers, and my boss would, on the first day of them, go, right, we need you to hit the ground running. And that to me just used to drain the blood out of my body when I heard it, because it just instantly created this stress and this pressure. So as soon as the boss is gone, I'll go, right, I'm mentoring you now. You don't need to hit the ground running. You don't need to know everything in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Ask as many questions as you want, even if you've answered them, even if I've answered them already and you've forgotten. Ask, because I know what it's like to forget the answers. I'd ask and it's gone. My ADHD brain just had no retention,
Hmm.
So I'm saying, ask the questions, keep asking them, get it wrong, and we'll keep reviewing things, and we'll get you there, and we'll kind of build you up. And the boss might be emailing, have you got that report? And I'm going, yeah, right, just calm down. We'll do our fourth pass over it now. And and to me, if I had that when I was doing it, when I was coming up, if I had somebody who could have allowed me to say that I wasn't sure, just could I ask you a question about that? That could have made all the difference to me. But instead, I had to say, okay, I'll do it. And I'll go off, and I'm going, oh man, how do I do this? And I bet the rest of them know how to do it, but I can't. So, yeah, that's the,
Yeah, making More space to be a
Yeah,
human.
that's it. And making space for the
Yeah.
quiet voices and the people who are masking their struggle
Right.
and flying under the radar or not speaking up. They're carrying a heavy load, and especially if they're dealing with imposter syndrome or hidden cognitive strain, you know, it's not about noticing who's speaking or who's playing safe. It is, about noticing who's maybe playing it safe and just gently drawing them in without putting them
Mhm.
on the spot. Are you all right? This kind of thing. Like just kind of gentle, uh, gentle feedback, gentle encouragement. I suppose mentioning feedback there. I used to I used to not believe feedback and praise. I I had such a extreme reaction to praise and feedback. If somebody said something like, "Oh, well done well," that would instantly set alarm bells off of me. And another funny story I tell was I was at a Christmas party one night and it was getting late and people were drunk and I don't drink, so I was kind of sitting there, kind of sober, the only one sober in the middle of it all. But their voices were probably louder, and I overheard my boss saying to one of my coworkers, saying, "Jason's a highly experienced fire engineer." And that was just like a bomb going off in my head. I was like, what did he mean by that? Why is he saying that? Did he say it because he knows I can hear him? As him and the guy he said it to, are they in cahoots now? Or is this some big setup? Are they kind of building me up? Is this some joke that the whole company is in on and they're going to just expose me in front of everybody? This is did they even set up the Christmas party just to frame this little scene? And I left the party about 10, 15 minutes later. I was going, right, I'm getting out of here. And I left the company about a month later. I just, that's how bad it was in my head. And it sounds extreme and it sounds almost unbelievable, but that's what it was like for me living in that in that space. I just praise to me was like, why? What's your ulterior motive here? What are you trying to, what are you
Right.
trying to do? So, with given feedback that lands properly. So instead of saying great job, it's kind of say like great job. You handled that meeting well because you kept your focus under pressure. Given something like that the person can kind of go, all right, thanks, yeah, I appreciate that.
More
Yeah, more
specific.
specific, rather than just, well done there. And I'm going, like, why? What's he going to, and then checking every email for the next 2 weeks, waiting for my resignation to be demanded or something. So,
So, some of the stats show that as many as 78% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point. Can you tell us a little bit about the project that you started, the 78% Club, and how that relates?
yes, the 78% Club, it came about with the first statistic I heard about imposter syndrome. There, 78% of people experience this, and it's just that figure stuck in my head. And I just instantly had this thing going, I want to normalize this for people. I don't want it to be something because felt I was on my own in isolation, being like this. And just to learn that I wasn't on my own, I was going, oh, that's amazing. So the name, the 78% Club, just came to me, and I just thought, if we can have everybody joining this club and being proud to be in it, and we're all members of the club, that's how we can normalize this feeling. That takes such an amount of the power and the sting out of this imposter belief that we have. So yeah, like I do a lot of one-to-one coaching, not necessarily to do with imposter syndrome or anything, just normal life coaching. But with the imposter syndrome, I felt that to normalize it by doing one-to-one coaching, you were only able to tell somebody that loads of other people experience this, but they weren't able to experience that. So I set up the 78% Club and we run workshops and boot camp. So the boot camp is 3 nights a week, just an hour a week, I think Monday, Tuesday, and a Thursday. And it's meant to be an intensive kind of boot camp, on imposter
Uh-huh.
syndrome and working through this. And we limit it to 10 people, so it's a nice small group. But in that 10 people, each person, and it gets to see nine other people who are also struggling, who are also living in fear, and they're also, keeping their head down or job hopping, and they can share their experiences, and they can see then, they can have fun about it and laugh about it instead of it being this horrible thing that they're a part of or that's a part of them. So yeah, like
Yeah.
the workshops or the boot camps are a great thing for just doing this normalizing. And we do a couple of little exercises and little breakout rooms where the guys can go into two and threes and just talk themselves and
Mhm.
just to say it to somebody else that you're feeling it and just for them to say it back to you, it's just so amazingly powerful in the effect that it can have on how you're perceiving all this. So yeah, it's about normalizing imposter feelings through doing it in a group setting. And the
Yeah.
workshops, then we would go into companies and, have you can either do them online. The boot camps are online with the workshops. I like to go into the companies and, have a half day, 3 hours, whatever. And all the staff in there can get to speak up and say their own little bits and pieces and have fun. And it breaks down a lot of these barriers that they might have had, sitting in the corner worrying about that they're the only one. And it's a really
Right.
good time for management and leaders to stand up and maybe show, oh yeah, I struggled with that when I became a leader first, or when I got this job, I was
Right.
panicking. And it breaks down that barrier and it allows this openness to become part of the culture. So yeah, they're
Absolutely. It sounds like the framework is really powerful and it gives people the opportunity to connect with others,
mm,
which community is so important, right? Even just
yeah.
finding one other person that's facing the same
Yeah,
challenge
oh, it
can make a
is.
big
It is.
difference.
It's such a powerful thing to do it in front of other people. And I wouldn't have known that until I started my coaching training where you had to really expose yourself in these settings
Hmm.
and it was so out
Hmm.
of my comfort zone. And by the end of it, though, you kind of go, no, that little breakout room was a pivotal moment for me there. Even when
Hmm.
the instructors weren't part of it, it was this interaction with other people who were in this same little boat as you. And the same with
Yeah.
the,
Well, I think this is really going to resonate, and I know that our audience will be interested in learning more about that, as am I. So we'll make sure to share all of the
oh,
links
yeah,
to the
yeah,
workshops and the boot camps that you have going
that'd be
on. Thank
great.
you.
Strong project outcomes need skilled managers and competent leaders. EMI's corporate training delivers expert led courses in project management and people leadership, plus industry recognized certification and exclusive premium content to take your team even further. Elevate your team's leadership capabilities today. Visit engineeringmanagementinstitute.org and click on corporate training.
So, if we spoke a lot about fear, if we're moving away from fear, is it possible to achieve peace at work? Do you see that where people have worked through a lot of this and then they describe going to work as a peaceful experience, or is that maybe?
Yeah, like I've found that peace now.
Hmm.
I used to have like so many people the Sunday evening dread when it'd get to
Yeah, the Sunday
yeah,
scaries.
I wrote a post on LinkedIn a while ago. It says my weekend used to end at Saturday morning at 11 a.m. because after that it was nearly Sunday and then it was nearly Monday. So I used to have that dread, but I don't anymore because I worked through my issues of why I hated my career, why I hated the job and everything else. And I realized, that there were issues that were because I didn't know about them, like the ADHD and the imposter syndrome that were affecting this. So it was just about doing the work on myself. Now, not everybody has ADHD. That was a light bulb moment for me, but not everybody is going to have that. But even the imposter syndrome and the hidden cognitive strain thing, it's realizing that you are experiencing it and then kind of going, well, is there anything that can be done? Is it the job? Is it the family? Is it the different things? And try and maybe even separating them or something like that to kind of go, right, I'll work on these things. I'll look at them individually and, try and work out my career issues. Why am I hating this job? Why am I hating this career? And a lot of the time it is because of just stress and fear and stuff. So it's about learning that the fear is a pattern. The fear is, it's not real, but it's very real to you. And these patterns that you've introduced make life hard, because when you're procrastinating, you're under constant pressure for not handing stuff up. When you're overworking, you're under constant pressure to keep working. And it's when you can learn to step back from these and, you know, find new patterns. Your coping strategies are protective strategies. But if you can find new protective strategies like setting boundaries, saying, no, I'm not going to work past 6 o'clock or 5:30. I'm not going to do any work at the weekend or the evenings, or, that's easier said than done in some careers. But it's about setting these boundaries, setting realistic expectations, maybe talking with your employers about it, and not being scared to say, oh, I'm struggling a bit, kind of, could I restructure my day, or could I do something else that, it's very hard because it's individual. But yeah, like,
Mm-hmm.
I I don't hate my job now. I would
Mm.
love to be a full-time Imposter Syndrome and hidden cognitive strain coach. And that was my plan at the start, was I have to get out of this job. But now I'm kind of enjoying being a fire engineer as well. And I'm happy to have a portfolio career. So
Yeah.
I've got my fire engineering, and I've got my coaching and my work. And because I'm kind of concentrating on the construction industry, I'm able to use what I know the pain points, I know the stresses, and I know the tough parts of the job. So I can hopefully help people then to learn to not hate their own job. And I think not hating the job is probably success, really. Who knows if you'll ever get to love the job again? Maybe very few people ever actually love their job, but to not hate
Yeah.
it and to get your Sunday evening back, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
a
Absolutely.
realistic goal. And I own my Sunday evenings 100%. And another joke I make is at 5:30 I stop here, or 5:30 on a Friday evening I stop being a fire engineer, and by 5:30 on Saturday afternoon I could hardly tell you what I do for a living. It's just, I've separated my career and my outside my career life to such a degree. And 4 years ago I was standing at a roundabout wondering would a bus take me out and end it all, because I could
Yeah.
see nothing else in my life because of all the stress. And now I'm very happy that the driver didn't lose control and headed off around. And I'll take the side step out of the way anymore when I walk the same road. So yeah, it's 100% achievable to move beyond that, and it's not hard. It's not that difficult.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be different, and your past and your different issues that you're bringing to the table will always dictate to a certain extent. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think acknowledging it and recognizing it.
So much growth in 4 years, and even beyond that, with the work that you do, sharing with others in our community as well too. We're really
Well,
grateful. I do have one final question for you. Do you have any last advice that you'd like to give to somebody in a leadership role, who wants to support people that are struggling quietly?
yeah, I suppose it's, don't assume that silence means somebody's okay. The people who are struggling the most are often the ones who seem calm, capable, upbeat, funny. They're not falling apart
Mm-hmm.
in front of you. They're getting the job done. They're meeting the deadlines. They're cracking jokes. But inside, they might be spinning plates in the dark. They're just one to the next, to the next, to the next. They're just holding it together with willpower alone. And that's what I'd call hidden cognitive strain. It's the cost of appearing fine while you're clinging on by your fingertips. And you don't need to have the perfect words. You don't need to be, as I say, the coach or therapist, just somebody who's safe to talk to, somebody who doesn't rush in with fixes and judgments and do this. And, as simple as saying, you've been doing a lot lately. How are you doing? And, just actually listening. And that's one of the things we learned or were taught in my coaching training, was about the levels of listening. They say there's three levels. Level one is, I'm listening to my own thoughts. I ask you a question and then I just listen to my own thoughts. That's level 1. Level 2 is when you're kind of listening to the person and you're maybe coming up with something else to say. But level 3 listening is where you're listening and you're here. You're not planning the next thing you want to say or what you're having for dinner. You're just there for the person and you're connected to it. So it's about creating space, not solutions. You're a manager, you're a leader. You don't have to fix your staff. That's not your job. But just to maybe know or to be aware that potentially some of them are struggling silently and know what to look out for.
Thank you for that. Jason, thank you so much for being here today and for your open sharing of your story and your work. It's so important and we're grateful to have had you.
It's been a pleasure to be on.
Please remember you can find the show notes for this episode at aecleadershippodcast.com. There you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as any links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during the podcast.